Good evening, everybody. I welcome you to today's session of Roznama, and let us quickly begin. All right. Now, yesterday you must have seen that the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, he passed away in a plane crash. So the first piece of news that we will be discussing today is the death of the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Ajit Pawar. Now, the news piece in its basic event is not important, but why do we have to take it up? Because of the static bit that is associated with it. So this particular event took place due to a plane crash, and it was a private plane operator. And just last year, when the Air India crash took place, there were a lot of jibes in the parliament, where the parliamentarians, they did try to draw attention of the present government on the not upkeep of the non-maintainability and the private jets not being upkept effectively by the private operators. So all these things were drawn attention towards last year after the Air India crash, but then naturally not too much of investigation was undertaken in that sphere. Now this particular plane crash has happened. So again, it is going to draw attention to better regulation of the civil aviation sector. So the civil aviation sector in terms of its regulation, security, etc., is looked into and looked after by the DGCA, which stands for Directorate General of Civil Aviation. Directorate General of Civil Aviation, and it is this agency which is responsible for ensuring security, basic upkeep, maintenance of the civil aviation sector in the country. And also, because we are talking about the civil aviation sector, so your homework is to look for the civil aviation minister of the country, and it is not Jyoti Rajesh Scindia. All right, so please look into who's the civil aviation minister of the country. All right, now because we are talking about Maharashtra, so you have to look into the basic governmental structure of Maharashtra. So as of now, the chief minister of Maharashtra is Devendra Fadnavis. The governor is Achyut Devrat. There are two deputy chief ministers of Maharashtra. One is Eknath Shinde, the other is Ajit Pawar, and Ajit Pawar is the same person who's passed away yesterday. And Ajit Pawar is also the longest serving deputy chief minister of Maharashtra, though not consecutively. He served as the deputy chief minister under various governments around 5 to 6 times. And it is his party, which is the Nationalist Congress Party, which is again a split between Sharad Pawar's Nationalist Congress Party and his Nationalist Congress Party. All right, and this particular alliance of these parties is known as Mahayuti. So it is the Mahayuti alliance which is currently in government in Maharashtra. The opposition alliance is known as Mahavikas Aghadi, and that is an alliance between the Congress and Shiv Sena under Uddhav Bal Thackeray. Okay. So this is the governmental structure that you have to keep in mind. And of course, they did give you certain insights and ideas as to what was the basic timeline that was followed. And all of this that has been recovered is recovered from something which is known as the black box of an aircraft. Okay, now what is the black box? The black box is a flight data recorder, and it is mandatory for every flight to have a black box. So what does it basically record? It records all the activities that are being undertaken inside the flight, so that if such a mishap happens, they have a record available of all the activities inside. All right, so everything that the pilot of the aircraft was saying, and asking for clearance for highway for the runway of the Baramati airport, etc. So all that has been recorded. Okay, so that recording is undertaken in a black box. All right. Okay, then this is just a continuance of the first piece of news. Also, this particular news piece in Hindu does obviously talk about the plane crash of Ajit Pawar, and it said that the aircraft crashed because of poor visibility on ground. also this gives you the other information on the other people, other major leaders who've lost their lives in plane crashes. Okay, so we have Homi Bhabha in 1966, then Sanjay Gandhi 1980, Madhav Rao Sindhya 2001. We have Y.S. Rajashekhar Reddy. We have General Bipin Rawat in 2021. Vijay Rupani last year in the Air India crash, he passed away. He was former Chief Minister of Gujarat. And we have Ajit Pawar, okay, who passed away yesterday. So this just gives you a basic information to the other leaders who passed away due to due to airplane crashes. So just keep the basic timeline in mind. Okay, and also one of the historical personalities also who lost his life in the aircraft was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Aircraft crash was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in 1943. Suspected aircraft crash at Taipei in Taiwan when he was fleeing India after the Azad Hind Fauj lost the battle to the British troopers. Okay, so Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was also one of the people who lost their lives due to an airplane crash. And just a few days back, just 1 week back, he was in news because his birth anniversary falls on the 23rd of January, which India observes as Parakram Divas. Okay, so keep this personality also in mind. All right. Then yesterday, the Prime Minister addressed the Parliament, which was the first day of the budget session of the Parliament. All right. Now, when we look at the parliamentary sessions, Article 85 of the Constitution provides for parliamentary sessions, and there are 3 parliamentary sessions, 3 annual sessions. One is known as the budget session, mostly from February to March, then monsoon session, July, August, and then winter session from November to December. So now is the budget session, and the session is so named because this particular session begins with the entire hubbub around presentation of the budget. And today we are getting the economic survey. 2-3 days later, that is on the 1st of February, we will be given the economic budget, the annual budget statement for the financial year 2026-27. All right. Now, this particular piece of news is just important so that you may relate it to everything that is happening in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka with respect to the governor's address to the state. All right. So the as it is done in the state, the same thing is done at the center also. That at the beginning of the year, the first session, and also after the elections have been are over and then a new government comes into power. So the first session of the Lok Sabha also after elections is mandatorily not it is a parliamentary convention which we have borrowed from Britain, and it has to be addressed by the president at the center and the governors in the state. Now, as it is for the state, the same thing is for the center also, that the president basically reads out a speech that is given to the president by the prime minister and his council of ministers. So naturally, this is also undertaken by the president on the aid and advice of the prime minister and the council of ministers. The second thing is that in this particular budget speech, the new parliament session speech, the president actually outlines everything that the government has done in the last year and all the basic successes of the government, and also talks about the basic things, activities, policies, programs, and the entire vision that the government seeks to undertake in this next ensuing year. All right. So the sessions of the parliament are talked about and are provided for in Article 85, and Article 87 calls for the address of the president. Okay. So keep these 2 articles in mind, and then it basically gives you an entire idea, an entire detailed input as to what were the major things that the president did mention in her speech. So the president talked about things like, firstly, began her address by congratulating the present government for the successful India-EU Free Trade Agreement, India-EU FTA. Then she also mentioned the GST reduction that the government had undertaken last year, which was naturally a major feat. Also talked about the Viksit Bharat Ji Ram Ji, or renaming of the Manrega Act. Then focused too much on Viksit Bharat ideation of the government that government seeks to do by 2047. Other mentions were that of the drawing, attention to the education sector. She did talk about Macaulay's Minute. Macaulay's Minute was given by Macaulay in 1835, which basically settled the dispute, which basically settled the entire differences back then on the medium of instruction in schools, whether education should be imparted in English language or it should be imparted in Indian languages. All right. So basically, she just talks about that, how the British have anglicized Indian education, and also how NEP is trying to do away with it. Then she also talked about or mentioned Swadeshi, through the government's vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. So Swadeshi, again, keep in mind, that was launched as a movement in protest of the partition of Bengal on 7th of August 1905. All right, so Swadeshi and boycott movements were launched then. And then also during her speech, like here see Thomas Macaulay, then also in her speech, she did talk about, mention or gave paid tributes to various leaders of the past, like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, B.R. Ambedkar, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Jayaprakash Narayan, Lohia, etc. So just keep their names in mind. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, we celebrated his 150th birth anniversary last year. So, and he is commemorated with the Statue of Unity, the tallest statue in the world. Also, he was, the person who was responsible for, uniting the entire country. So drew attention to those things. Then J.P. Narayan, known for his total revolution movement in 1974 during the Congress government back then. So these were the various things that she had, talked about in her session. So just keep an eye out on these, and keep a little, get a little detailed information on all the things that she had actually talked about. Okay. Then here, see, she also laid emphasis on equality and social justice, types of justice that are given to the Indians under the preamble. So it's a wonderful speech. It does give you a lot of GK related information. So make sure that you go through. Okay. All right. Then this particular piece of news, only have to do it very briefly, but this is important, and I flagged here because of all the straining of relations that is presently happening between USA and India because of the innumerable amounts of tariffs that the US president is imposing on India. Just keep an outline of the various tariffs that have been imposed. One is the reciprocal tariff of 25%, then an additional 25% tariff on India because India is buying Russian oil, and the third recent threat has been to all those countries who are undertaking trade with Iran. So India is also one of those countries who has although very minimum trade of 0.15%, but yes, we do have a trade with Iran. So for that also an additional 25% of tariffs. And then recently, naturally, we've had the EU FTA deal. So this opens up our prospects to alternative markets where we can send in our exports, taking us away from US. And if we are not sending much things to US, then naturally the tariffs will not be having any negative implications for India. And in such a backdrop, the US, our foreign minister is visiting United States of America. So naturally, he will try to negotiate, draw in some concessions for India. And also his basic purpose there is to attend this meeting, which is known as Inaugural Critical Minerals ministerial meeting, which is scheduled to be held on February 4th. So critical minerals are basically those minerals which are strategically very, very important for the economic development of any region. And recently, US has launched this initiative of Pax Silica, which was in news 1 or 2 weeks back. So Pax Silica has silicon, which basically talks about semiconductor industries. So that also forms a major part of critical minerals. India itself has its own national critical minerals mission, through which India, not only within the country, but also wants to strike agreements and trade pacts with internationally as well, to bring or increase its entire extraction of critical minerals, which is going to add to strategic industries in the country. This article talks about the various effects, and you will find innumerable articles which talk about various effects of the India EU FTA. And this particular article was in the economic section of the Indian Express, and this tells us how this free trade agreement is going to benefit the pharma sector in India. So how is this actually going to affect the pharmaceutical sector? Is because the pharmaceutical sector is actually a major income bringing sector for India. And India is actually, one of the largest producers and one of the largest exporters of pharmaceuticals to the world. And to produce these pharmaceuticals, we do take a lot of raw materials from the European countries. So because this free trade agreement has brought in a lot of zero tariffs on many inputs and raw materials from the pharmaceutical sector from Europe. So it is going to give a major boost to the pharmaceutical manufacturing in the country. Over 90% products that India uses as raw materials in the pharmaceutical sectors has, its entire tariffs are now reduced to 0%. All right. So it just gives you a basic idea as to how the pharmaceutical sectors is going to benefit. Okay. Then coming to the editorials for today. The first one, now I only wanted to take this article so that you can keep this term in mind, discombobulator. Now, they did say that when US undertook this entire attack on Venezuela and captured the president of Venezuela, President Maduro, so US actually used this weapon, which is known as a discombobulator, and they say that it is not a single weapon. It may be a single weapon and it can be a combined weapon also, which has multiple capabilities. And they did say that US used this to basically, diffuse or do away with or jam their entire defense mechanism, which facilitated the US armed forces to enter into Venezuela and quickly catch hold of the president and bring them from from Venezuela to India. All right. So this gives us a good insight into what the discombobulator system is. All right. So you can go through it and it's a very sophisticated system, and what does it actually help in? It will give you a good understanding. So you can go through this article. Then the next one, again, it was for India EU free trade agreement. Just basically gives you another perspective as to how beneficial is this agreement for us, and what are the various sectors that India has managed to keep out of the tariff ambit. Also draws attention to the carbon border adjustment mechanism here, and how India has, very diplomatically well negotiated its entire tariff range out of the carbon border adjustment mechanism. That was one of the hindrances earlier that this particular treaty could not culminate. Okay. Chalo. Then India, the beautiful, but first India, the functional. All right, it's a wonderful article. I've just given it because it is a very beautifully written article. You can go through it just to, have another sweet thing to read today. All right. So this article written by Shashi Tharoor basically tells us that, how tourism sector is suffering from India due to infrastructural glitches, and, what better things can India do to promote its tourism sector and to promote foreign tourism in the country, all right, that India should become more functional. It is very beautiful, but for other countries, people from other countries to come to India and look into it, it has to become a little more functional. Okay. All right. Then this particular article was in news, was in the text and context bit of the Hindu. It is important more for your legal section, but I've taken it up here. So what this article actually says, that it just draws our attention to this particular question, where this was a case in Kerala, where the enforcement directorate had issued writs towards the Kerala government, and the Kerala a particular authority which was associated in some smuggling case, and this Kerala government then retaliated by filing a case, that is the enforcement directorate actually so capable to issue writs like that of the constitutional courts. All right, so again no clear cut verdict has been given on the court as of on the case as of now, and the Supreme Court is still hearing the case, and they are going to the Supreme Court is still hearing the case, and a judgment is going to whenever a final judgment does come, then naturally we'll take it up, but no final judgment as of now has been given by the Supreme Court. Okay, so because it had a lot of static bits to it, that is why the an entire article becomes important. So here we have the term writ. So what are writs? Writs are legal orders that are issued by the Supreme Court and the High Courts in the country. So the entire term of constitutional courts that is mentioned here, so constitutional courts simply imply the courts which are formed as per the articles in the constitution. So to issue writs, there are two articles which are in the constitution. One is Article 32, which provides the writ issuing power of the Supreme Court, and one is Article 226, which provides for the writ issuing power of the High Court. All right. Now, under this writ issuing power, the Supreme Court and the High Courts, they can issue a total of 5 writs. The writs being habeas corpus, mandamus, certiorari, prohibition, and quo warranto. All right, they've mentioned all of these writs here, and they've given you a good understanding as to what these writs actually mean. Coming to Article 32 and 226, there is a basic difference between Article 32 and Article 226, which is that Article 32 provides for the writ issuing power of the Supreme Court, and this Article 32 is also a part of fundamental rights. What it tries to imply is that the Supreme Court can issue writs to enforce somebody's fundamental rights in case somebody's fundamental rights is not being met. That is, to get your fundamental rights met also is a fundamental right. All right. Now coming to Article 226 of the High Court, Article 226 empowers the High Court to issue writs not only for enforcement of fundamental rights but for other purposes also. Now, in this sense, the writ issuing power of the High Court is broader as compared to the writ issuing powers of the Supreme Court. All right, this is one difference that you must keep in mind. Now, the courts in the country, the Supreme Court, the High Court, they are empowered to issue writs, and they can issue writs. The question here that arises is that is the Enforcement Directorate, which is a body which is a statutory body which is established under the FEMA Act of 1999, is that particular body adept enough to issue writs? So that is the question that is under consideration in the Supreme Court, and then they are pondering upon it to give a final verdict soon. Okay, so go through the article there. Then coming to terminologies and news in brief. All right, this piece of news, now in the Indian Constitution, there are provisions that we don't have a national language for the country, because India is a very, very linguistically diverse country where, you know, there are more than 1600 languages with innumerable dialects that are spoken in India. So every person in the country has the right to preserve, protect, promote their own languages. Keeping in line with this diversity, it was decided in 1950 that India will not have a national language. India will have official languages. So official languages were divided into 4 sections. One was the official language of the center, which was considered as Hindi and English was supposed to be the connecting language between the Hindi speaking and the between the center and the non-Hindi speaking states. Then another section was the official languages of the states. So the states were permitted to have official languages, which were the regional languages in their respective state. All right. So, for example, there are in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, there are around 22 scheduled languages, and these 22 scheduled languages mostly are the languages which are also the state official languages of different states. For example, Telugu, the official language for Telangana, Andhra Pradesh; Malayalam, the official language for Kerala; Marathi, the official language for Maharashtra; UP has Urdu, English and Hindi as their official languages, and naturally English is also an official language for the state governments, just to act as a connecting language. Now, Karnataka government has proposed to include Tulu as the second official language. They can do so, but one thing that you have to keep in mind that Tulu is not one of the scheduled languages of India. Okay? Okay. Then coming to the next one. Now again, this particular piece of news, not so important, but I just wanted to flag the National Human Rights Commission for India, which is a statutory body established in 1993. The current chairperson of National Human Rights Commission is Shri Justice V. Ramasubramanian. All right. Another thing that you have to keep in mind with respect to NHRC is that naturally this particular commission has been established taking cue from the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Okay. And Human Rights Commission at the United Nations level is established as per the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. This was brought into existence on 10th of December 1948, and because of this adoption on 10th of December is also observed as International Human Rights Day. And this United Nations Declaration of Human Rights United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, it also forms the basis of our constitution's part 3, which calls for fundamental rights from articles 12 to article 35. All right. Another piece of news that you have to keep in mind that this original document of United Nations Declaration on Human Rights has been included last year under UNESCO's Memory of the World program. All right. And also to the United Nations Human Rights Commission, India has been elected as one of the chairpersons for the 7th time for a time period from 2026 to 2028. All right. These were certain miscellaneous information that I wanted to flag with NHRC. So keep it in mind. Then India is holding security dialogues with Saudi Arabia. Only I wanted to flag this because this is the 3rd India-Saudi Arabia Security Working Group dialogue, and also because Pakistan recently has signed a security pact with Saudi Arabia. So keep an eye out for that. Then again, just a continuation that Trump has continuously been threatening Iran to come to terms with certain the nuclear power policies and conditions as per the United States of America. So they are right now, issuing dialogues to each other. Trump is threatening Iran with war. Iran is countering it, saying that we are absolutely ready. So again, Trump has issued another statement saying that make the deal or next attack will be far worse. Then coming to the next one, again, just a basic opinion on the European Union Free Trade Agreement, and this has been called for historic for youth because a mobility pact has been signed under EU FTA. Mobility matlab movement of facilitating movement of people from India to that particular country, and this mobility is in terms of education, employment, and employment also for both skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled workers. Okay. Then all right, again H1B visa was in news last year. So H1B visas are actually work visas and education visas that are issued by USA to people who are non-citizens of US, all right? And these H1B visas are issued via a lottery system. Now they are trying to do away with the lottery system. Lottery meaning that it is just your luck that you get selected, that it does not work on the principle of first come first serve basis. And also H-1B visa brought into existence in 1990, and Indians are the largest recipients or beneficiaries of the H-1B visa. All right. So last year there was a news piece on it that the H-1B visa fee has been hiked from around $3,000 to $5,000 to $1 million. All right. So 95,000 to $1 million. So naturally it is a major fee hike. And because of this fee hike, recently, yesterday, Texas, one of the states of United States of America, it has put a stop on H-1B visa to state institutions temporarily, which they are saying that this freeze is going to stay put till 2027. So naturally, this is going to impact Indians. All right. I think the last piece of news, second last piece of news for today that you have to keep in mind is that Bangladesh is now posing up to China, and Bangladesh has signed a defense deal with China for unmanned aerial vehicles production plant in Bangladesh. All right, just keep basic one-liner in mind. Then another term I wanted to flag for you is prima facie. Prima facie means in the face of it, meaning that circumstantial evidences are available. You are still looking into solid evidences, but on the face of it, whatever you have substantial grounds to believe that some particular crime, etc., has been undertaken. Okay. So that was all for today's newspaper analysis. I hope everything is absolutely clear to you, and I'll see you soon for the next one. Okay. Thank you.